Thank you for joining today's Digital Irish webinar. My name is Brian O'Reilly. I recently had the privilege of joining the Digital Irish board here in New York, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's panel discussion on how tech sales is evolving after COVID. If this is your first time attending a Digital Irish event, you're very welcome. A little bit about the network. We're NYC and London-based nonprofit with a mission of connecting Irish innovation globally by promoting startups, entrepreneurs, and professionals who want to make an impact on a global stage. Obviously, we've been virtual over the past 2 years, but we do hope to be back in person with in-person events in New York and London in the very near future. This coming year, we'll be bringing you a series of panel events like this one. We'll also be bringing you high-profile speaker events, and we'll be bringing back some of our startup showcase events, which we became known for over the past few years. If you want to hear more about this and future events, please do go to digitalirish.com and you can click join the community there to receive updates on these events. Now, as a nonprofit, we obviously are supported in producing these events by sponsors. And I'd like to mention two sponsors, Dermot Fitzpatrick, Vice Consul General at the Irish Consulate in New York City, and Fiona McEntee of McEntee Law Group in Chicago. And I believe Dermot is on, and I'll pass it over to Dermot just to say a few words.
Hi, thanks, Brian. And it's a pleasure to see everyone online. I'd just like to extend my thanks to Brian, Fergal, Gavin, and the rest of the team at Digital Irish for the invitation. I'd just like to reiterate what Brian said. I think as we begin to move past the pandemic, ways of working and meeting up have been altered forever. So I think online and hybrid events are here to stay. But with that said, I do hope I get to meet you all at Digital Irish events in person in the near future. Gavin invited me here to discuss the Consulate's priorities for 2022, which was a welcome prompt to think about what our priorities for 2022 actually were. So broadly speaking, the Consulate in 2022 is looking to re-engage, to reconnect, and to reopen. So as always, our first priority is our people. Nothing else we do or attempt to do really means anything if we don't put the needs of the Irish community first. So in 2022, that'll mean strengthening relationships with the Irish community in New York. During the last 2 years, we've maintained a presence, largely online and attending events and through funding through our immigrant support program. But the lack of in-person events has meant that we haven't been out amongst the community in the way that we would like to have been or would have been used to in the past. So we hope that as restrictions ease or are lifted entirely, we hope to meet with more of you and to hear your concerns. The Consulate always welcome ideas and input as we re-emerge from this unprecedented time. Re-engaging is a two-way street. So we look forward to hearing from you and about your ideas. But beyond the sort of reconnecting with the Irish community, we'll be looking to establish links and further strengthen the relationship between Ireland and New York beyond the diaspora. So St. Patrick's Day coming up will be an ideal opportunity to do this. So we'll have 2 ministers coming in March, and it's giving us a chance to engage politically, economically, as well as with our diaspora. So that'll be a huge focus at the Consulate in the next month. And then broadly overall, the Consulate will be sending the message that Ireland is open again, and that it's a great place to live, to study, to work, and to do business with. And a huge part of that will be working with business networks like Digital Irish. I know from working with Gavin and Fergal that you'll all be valuable partners in those efforts, because sending that message that Ireland is a great place will involve showcasing innovation, involve highlighting innovative Irish business. And so networks, in particular Digital Irish, will be invaluable in those efforts. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you're here to hear about tech sales, and So I just wanted to thank you again for having me and allowing me to talk about the consulate. And again, I hope to meet you all in person in the very near future. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. And thanks again, Dermot. Also, a quick plug for our podcast. We have a podcast which is produced by Dave Byrne, and Dave is going to say a few words about the podcast before we get started.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you all for joining today. And I know some of you are already signed up to the Digital Irish podcast, but if you are not, this is another format where we speak to Irish entrepreneurs and innovators about everything that they're working on. We're moving into our third year of the podcast. If you haven't already, please do check us out. Fergal has dropped some link to the Spotify link there. I'll also drop our direct link on the digitalirish.com website, where you can check out our previous episodes of podcasts. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We've got more episodes kicking off again in March around the time of St. Patrick's Day to celebrate Irish innovation, especially as it comes to the topic that we're talking about today, the world post-COVID. So please do check that out. Check out our previous episodes. And if you are ever interested in showcasing your own startup or your own innovations on the podcast, please reach out to hello@digitalirish.com. Thanks very much. And Brian, back over to you.
Cheers, Dave. And finally, our contact info is hello@digitalirish.com if you want to get in touch for whatever reason. Okay, let's dive into the panel, Life After COVID and How Tech Sales is Evolving. If you have questions throughout the discussion, just drop them into the chat, and we're going to leave some time for audience questions at the end. Okay, Shane, Debbie, Sarah Ann, and Dara, you are all very, very welcome.
Thanks, Brian. Great to be here.
And yeah, thank you so much for opting to spend some of your Valentine's Day with us all. It's very much appreciated. Let's do a quick round of intros. Shane, I heard your voice first, so we might kick it off with you.
Yeah, sure. So Shane Murphy-Reuter, I currently CMO at ZoomInfo. Yeah, I'm a marketer, the token marketer on the panel, as Bor calls me. But I spent most of my second half of my career working for companies selling software to sales and marketing teams, originally at AdRoll, then Intercom, now ZoomInfo. And I've also dabbled in a little bit of sales management here or there with running some sales functions. So I know enough to get myself into trouble, but definitely marketing is more my passion.
Great stuff. Thanks, Shane. Debbie?
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. My name is Debbie Wogan. I am the Chief Revenue Officer of a company called TVSquared, and we are the largest global measurement and attribution platform for converged TV. We're a Scottish-based company, and most of our sales and sales support located in the US. With a lot of engineering and product in Edinburgh. I've spent the last, 10 months here at TVSquared in really my first role in pure tech sales and platform sales. Before that, spent many years in digital advertising sales at places like Spotify, Amazon, and NBC Universal.
Great stuff.
So thanks for having me, Brian.
Thanks for being here, Debbie. Great. Over to you, Dara.
Thanks, Brian. So my name is Dara Fitzpatrick, and as a quick introduction, I'm the SVP of Sales at Roworks, which, for those of you who have never heard of, is an ABM platform and the B2B arm of Nextro. So we've grown from just over 100 people early last year to nearly 250 today. And we are continuing to hire across all roles for anyone in the audience who is exploring new opportunities. I did start my career thinking I would be a management consultant, but took a hard left, joined Google, and after that went to AdRoll in Dublin, where I met Brian and Shane. as well as a few other familiar and friendly faces on the call. But I lived in New York for a couple of years, and I was due to split my time between Dublin and New York as of March 2020. So those plans were obviously shelved with COVID, and I've been running a US sales team from Dublin for the last 2 years. So I'm actually in Dublin today and excited to be on the panel and hopefully can give some useful insight as well.
Great stuff. Thanks, Dara. And Sarah Ann.
Hi, thanks, Brian. Sarah Ann Collins. I'm a director of sales at LinkedIn. I head up enterprise sales on the East Coast. I've been in sales function at LinkedIn for about 8 years, only ever worked in the New York office. I assume everybody here knows LinkedIn, so I'll not get into like what we do. But I'm really excited to be here today. Prior to LinkedIn, I actually worked for Invest Northern Ireland for 4 years in New York. So I'm quite familiar with events like this.
Great. Thanks, Sarah Ann. Okay. Right. So Shane, I might kick things off with you. So you've mentioned you're the CMO at ZoomInfo. You're selling into global sales and marketing leaders, and you've also led sales teams in the past, or you've at least dabbled. So tell us, what changes have you observed over the last 2 years that have been brought on by COVID?
Yeah, like this might be the obvious answer, but speed to deal with change is just like been huge. I think everybody can cast a mind back to when COVID actually hit, and at the time I was at Intercom, and suddenly our whole strategy for the year just completely imploded. And you know, now it's ZoomInfo. So for anyone who doesn't know, ZoomInfo is a public company. It actually it was the first tech company to go public post-COVID. And it really kind of benefited from a lot of the disruption at the time. And I'll give an example of like a customer that we had. This isn't a ZoomInfo pitch, but it's a really good story of like a company having to like pivot. We had this customer who was selling like gazebos and tents and those sort of things for parties, basically. And obviously that business went to zero and very, very quickly just pivoted to doing that for like hospitals and those sort of things. And was able to do that, I think, due to all of the digital tools that I think we're going to talk about a little bit later. But for sure, just being able to pivot on a dime now, I think it was always important in business, but now the things are moving so much more quickly. And certainly in the era of digital, it's so much easier for your competition and for consumers to change their behavior that, you know, I think you need to be able to constantly be on top of that and move really, really quickly. And there's many examples of companies that haven't done that and the successful ones have. It's kind of obvious, but I think that's the biggest one for me that I've noticed.
It's kind of more flexibility becoming a kind of a requirement. Yeah. Debbie, so you obviously have an amazing CV or resume, should I say. You're at Amazon just as COVID was breaking. You're more recently now at TV Squared. What changes have you seen?
I think, you know, coming from a really giant juggernaut like Amazon and, you know, now at a, 150 person company, I see a lot of the same challenges. And I think I'll tackle one specifically that I, saw, which was anybody who's, onboarding at a new company. It's really been so much more difficult with COVID. As you know, from any of you starting new roles, right? It's great if you're sitting in an office with your peers, you're listening, you're absorbing, you don't realize you are. There's people around to ask questions of all the time. And when you are onboarding in this virtual environment, it is, you have to be a self-starter, you have to be curious, you have to be willing to potentially get out of your comfort zone and ask people who you don't know that well for help and for guidance. So I think a lot of the onboarding, structure needs to be created by management and leadership and, tweaked as it goes. But I do think the skill set now required by that new employee just has to be broader and has to, the employee has to feel confidence in, reaching out and asking for help.
Yes.
That's, I think, one of the biggest changes I've noticed, especially having onboarded both at Amazon and at TV Squared during COVID.
Yeah. Onboarding needs to be much more intentional. You know, you can't have people just turn up to a physical office and, you know, go and ask people questions. You know, they're obviously sitting remotely, so you need to be much more intentional about what their onboarding schedule is. I mean, that's a great point.
Brian, I'd love to actually double down on that one for a second. Just taking a lesson from recently at ZoomInfo, we had started to see some of our new business conversion rates on the sales side dip a little bit, and obviously very concerning when we started to see that happen. And what we did was we realized that if you split it out by new joiners to the sales org who are coming up through the SDR program versus new people who are coming in externally, the conversion rates were quite different, and we were increasing the proportion of the people that were coming in externally versus being promoted up through the SDR program. And so in fact, actually the conversion rates weren't dropping at all. It was simply just a mix of where we were onboarding people from. And we were able to really quickly fix it by effectively doing what Debbie just described, which is overhauling the onboarding program for the AEs that were coming in externally, and having them go through some of the similar types of trainings that our internal folk go through as they come up the ranks through SDR program. So if anybody is like, one of the big lessons I took for that for the rest of my career is anytime I'm working with a sales team is to start looking at conversion rates by sort of the tenure and where those AEs or SDRs have come from, to see if there's like a lesson you can take there in how you improve those conversion rates, you know?
And Shane, I guess, and just to be specific, I guess the root problem was these folks are being onboarded and not benefiting from the kind of, you know, turn around and ask someone who's sitting beside you a question, or, you know, walk over to someone's desk and ask them a question when it comes up. You know, they were, I guess, the only onboarding they had was the sessions that were scheduled.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas the SDRs who are being promoted have the benefit of, firstly, a lot of them were here pre-COVID, but then also they have the benefit of just sort of having their training wheels on for longer, and just having a different training path. And so effectively overhauling the training path for the AEs that were coming in externally helps really improve that conversion rate.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Dara, so SVP at Rollworks, your teams are predominantly selling to sales and marketing leaders. You know, and this is kind of a segue maybe from the topic that Shane and Debbie were just referring to, but has it been easier or harder for your reps to hit quota over COVID?
Yeah, I think for us, so 2020 and 2021 were very different. When COVID hit, there was naturally a huge amount of uncertainty. So we made big adjustments to quota so that our team still had a chance to be successful, but to some degree that you're kind of guessing, right? You're making some assumptions that, you know, we're really backed by instinct as opposed to anything else. And what we actually found by, you know, Q3 2020 was there was a movement of marketing budgets from things like in-person events to actually online. So we started to see a spike in demand, which was great. It was a good problem to have, but it definitely meant that our sales team actually had a much better back half of 2020 as we gone and lowered their quotas. So there definitely wasn't any complaints from the sales team individually, but probably a few raised eyebrows in finance. But I still think it was the right thing to do and was definitely very well appreciated within our teams. And to Shane's earlier point, it showed, you know, our ability to pivot. And I think that definitely gets respect within the org. I think in 2021, we had 70% of ramped reps hit, which is significantly above the median, is about 47 to 50% that you see in the industry. And I think as a sales leader, my strong belief is definitely that quotas have to be fair. And in a world where the job market is really, really attractive today, and I think you still see about 40% or I think they're estimating that 40% of sellers will change jobs this year. So they need to feel like they aren't set up for failure. And I think we've tried to take that forward into 2022 in the model that we've built for this year. I think where we did have challenges, though, was mentioned already on the call, is on the ramping reps. And I think for us, it was definitely getting them to the quota within the expectations that we set and how quickly we thought they could ramp. And I think for us, we've had a lot of learnings from having to do it remotely. And I think really in the last 3 to 4 months, I've spent a lot of time rethinking both how we do internal and external. And we share similarities to ZoomInfo in that respect, in that our SDRs have actually ramped really well and external have taken longer. And I think what we spotted was the big piece that was disconnected was actually to do not with their first kind of 30 to 45 days when they joined Roworks, was really after that, and our sales managers taking their overview of the business and actually translating into when they should have the right level of pipeline, their real understanding of the sales process, and really getting into the nitty-gritty of the sales motion. So I hope we've kind of corrected ourselves for this year, but time will probably tell.
Yeah, onboarding is obviously coming up as a common theme now. And just real quick, is it enablement that owns onboarding for all the panelists?
It is for us.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Yep,
see.
for us too. I think we've tweaked it along the way, though, based on needs, right, and feedback. If anything, I think sales has gotten a little bit more involved to help with the onboarding process. And what we've seen work for us really well is the buddy system, pairing up a sales rep, a new rep with an existing one has just helped them tremendously.
Yeah, someone who they might just feel a little bit more comfortable reaching out to over Slack or internal communication systems. So Dara mentioned a stat that's really interesting. 40% of sales reps are going to leave their job this year, which is it's kind of baffling. Sarah Ann, you're at LinkedIn. I'm sure you've got a unique perspective on this trend, and maybe more generally, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far. So at LinkedIn, just to answer your last question about onboarding first, traditionally onboarding was owned by sales enablement. However, we have found that leaving new hires to their own devices to work through their sales enablement plans is just not working. So sales have gotten much more involved. We too have a buddy system. Obviously, it's all remotely now, but it's certainly not perfect, but we've definitely made strides. To answer your question about what was it? What was the stat? 40% of salespeople?
Did I get that right, Dara? Is it 40% you mentioned?
Yeah, unless the paper I read was completely wrong, but it seemed pretty legit.
Awesome, great, got that much to look forward to. So I think like we at LinkedIn, we talk about the great reshuffle, and in the media they talk about the great resignation. And the reason we call it the great reshuffle is that we are certainly seeing a portion of people resign from their positions and stay unemployed for a short period of time. However, what we're seeing is that more people are actually resigning from their jobs and finding new jobs. And so the way we're looking at it internally at LinkedIn is how can we, if people are more interested in career pathing at the moment, which they seem to be, how can we ensure that we're career pathing internally within our company? And so we have a whole program that we started in January that we're rolling out. And essentially we are going through each individual at the company to make sure that we are career pathing with them. So especially within the sales department, maybe it's perhaps they're interested in a upwards promotion, sideways promotion. We've got lots of different departments. Obviously LinkedIn is a very big company. And so obviously if we've got great talent, first and foremost, we want them to be happy and stay with the company. Secondly, if going further afield is something that they want to do in their next play, we can be supportive of that, right? And if we're having those career conversations early and often as managers, then we won't be surprised. Obviously that's not what we want, but if people are interested in moving on, we do want to be supportive of them. And so In addition to that, we work super closely with our recruiting partners, and we're always hiring and always pipelining. And obviously diversity and inclusion plays a very big role in that as well. But over the course of the past like 18 months, a big trend that I've seen, not just in our company, but within a lot of our customers and a lot of the companies that are online on LinkedIn, is the role of learning and development, and how that's playing into the great reshuffle, the great resignation, the great retention, whatever you want to call it. And we're actually seeing the role of Chief Learning Officer be a role that's becoming much more prominent on the network, with a lot of companies looking for that position within their company that maybe didn't exist pre-COVID. And so as another way to retain talent, and I could talk about retaining talent all day, it's a huge, huge topic for us, and one that we talk about regularly on the network. But those are just some immediate observations, Brian.
That's great. It's very interesting. Chief Learning Officer. It's great to see that emphasis being placed on that function. So 40% of sales reps are going to, if the paper that Dara read is accurate, or if the forecast is accurate, are going to leave their jobs this year. So, career pathing is typically, right, the number one thing that people look for at a company. But with inflation at 7%, what role do you think, or how do you think people are thinking about their compensation and maybe chasing inflation by trying to get a job where maybe comp has already been adjusted based on that 7% inflation? And I'll take this from any of the panelists.
We're certainly seeing that at LinkedIn. So the way we look at it, though, and I think a lot of companies do, is like the full package, right? So obviously there's the compensation package. It's, if you're talking specifically in sales, what that looks like from a commission perspective, et cetera. How likely are they to hit their quota, hit their number, those sort of things. I do think there's more that kind of goes into the overall package that people are looking for these days. So certainly, obviously, they want a competitive salary package, but folks are always interested in benefits. What does that look like? Remote work. What does that look like? The number of vacation days they get a year. More and more, we're seeing folks look for balance, particularly Gen Z. Obviously, I'm not saying that they're not interested in money. They definitely are. And especially at the moment, we definitely need to be competitive. But I think finding balance within their work, and also working for mission and purpose-driven companies, we're seeing is much more attractive to younger folks than just the salary package.
Great. I saw Shane, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, I think the 7% is massively undercounting the actual inflation that's going on in the job market specifically. Like, I certainly know that a couple of people in maybe not my team, somebody else's team, last week both came in hand with salaries that were 50% above what they're currently earning. It's just insane. And I think the big thing for me is also like transparency in comp. And I don't know, many people here use companies like Radford, who are really, I think I've used them at every single company I've been at, which Radford give like every single type of job, and they'll tell you for the different levels, kind of the salary bands. And it's really, really helpful. And I've always made a rule of being transparent with my teams on what the bands are, what their level is, where in the band they sit. Because I think some of it's a lot to do with trust. And then I think it was, I can't remember, Sarah, what you said around career pathing, so they can understand where they sit today and how we're going to get them to the next level. It means that they have that sort of like path internally, as opposed to having to chase that path externally. I will say though that Radford, the problem with Radford is I don't know how often it's updated, but I think right now they might need to update it like every week to keep up with the changes in the market. But yeah, I think for me the big thing is just being really transparent there, so that people feel that trust.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Sarah, you mentioned having a kind of more holistic approach from a benefits perspective. I mean, for all the panelists, any is there anything you're seeing in the market right now from a benefits perspective that's been particularly interesting?
Yes. Fertility benefits is becoming much more commonplace as people try to attract and retain women in the workforce. That is something that is becoming more and more important, and we're seeing it across various organizations, including our own.
Yeah, Debbie, I see you're off mute there as well.
Yeah, we see, you know, a lot of, you know, extended parental leave. And I know from, you know, my days at Spotify where it was a 6-month parental leave, that, you know, that's really valued by employees. So I would say that that's, you know, just to add to Sarah Ann's comment, in addition to fertility, also the parental leave is hugely important.
Yeah, I'm seeing that too. Anything from your Dara or Shane?
No, nothing else to add specifically my side, no.
I think, you know, I am hearing myself that particularly for private companies offering RSUs, it's becoming more and more common now versus offering options, you know, and previously RSUs were typically only offered by public companies. That's one kind of interesting observation I had. Okay, so virtual versus in-office attendance policies. So we'd love to just quickly poll each panelist on this. What are your current office policies and how do you see them evolving? And maybe Dara, you can kick us off.
Yeah, I can kick us off. We've given, so first of all, at Nextro, it is the employee who decides. Right, there are a couple of functions like IT, for example, where there's an expectation that they'll spend a couple of days in the office. But the broad strategy is that the individual decides. And there are 3 statuses you can have. First is you can be fully remote. Second is office, where you will say 3 days or more per week. And then you flex, where you're 1 to 2. So we don't see that changing, and we've kind of made a commitment that is the model that we want to proceed with. I think what we will do is we're actually just announced that we're lifting mask mandates in certain offices, right? So I think that's held a lot of people back, where they don't want to sit in an office with a mask all day. And I do think as we get more people back, I think what we will likely do is try to coordinate certain days in the office for certain teams when there are people who are going. So, like, for example, in our New York office, I know we saw that there were certain days of the week that were very popular with people to go in. So trying to build more of that when teams can go in and collaborate, and if they want to do any social activities, it kind of suits people's schedule. So I think now that we've lifted the mask mandate in certain offices, I think we'll probably just get smarter in creating an environment that gives you the biggest opportunity for collaboration in person.
Makes sense. And is your expectation that, say 6 months into the future, most people will be in the office a day a week, 2 days a week? Like what does normal look like?
Yeah, I think for us, I think anyone who lives in a city where there is access to an office, right? We've got people who are all over the US, but I think anyone who lives with access to an office, I actually do believe that people will want some level of connectivity, and that will range from 1 to 4 days a week, in my opinion. Because I think I even noticed, I was back in our New York office in December, and the ability to just spend time with certain teams and like brainstorm on different ideas, like I do think it can make a big difference. So yeah, I think roughly 1 to 4 days a week for anyone who lives in the cities that we have an office is what I would expect.
Yeah. Sarah Ann, what's happening at LinkedIn?
We're actually a very similar policy to Dara's. So we were one of the first companies to come out with like 100% remote policy as led by the employee. So it is your choice. since COVID, we have done away with like having your own desk in the office, right? We don't have our own desks or phones or anything like that. So it's all hotel desk style. And we're slowly opening new floors and things like that, or reopening, sorry, floors that were closed because of COVID. And again, because New York, the mask mandate, obviously it depends on the country where the office is based on their COVID restrictions, but we intend to keep the policy that we currently have. I think the tricky thing is, just I guess if it's the same question that you asked Sarah, like what will it look like in the future? I think, we run surveys 4 times a year with our employees to understand a various range of different things. But one of the things that we have been surveying on is COVID and how they want to work and working from home, etc. The majority of people do want to come into the office 1 to 2 days a week, especially if they're within traveling vicinity. So I think what we're really thinking through as a company is how do we create an environment where it's not required to go into the office. We know that there's great benefit from going into the office, especially from a team perspective, but how do we continue to make sure that it's inclusive, right? So if you're hosting an event in the office with your team, for those that are not in the office, how do we make sure that that feels like the same experience? And so we're doing a lot of work on that at the moment. And then additionally, we have also created a world essentially where if you are within the United States and you want to work in a different city, so you're deciding to go 100% remote, depending on where you are, you may take a reduction in salary to go fully remote from that location. So for example, if your location was New York or San Francisco, which would be the higher paid bands on the coast, and you decide to go work in, example, Utah or somewhere like that, you would probably take a bit of a reduction on salary to do that. And slightly controversial, people don't love it, but also, there is massive upside from taxes and things like that, and obviously savings from not living in the expensive cities and the salaries that you get due to living in those cities. So it's an ongoing discussion topic with reps at the moment.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one. And just so I understand, they peg your salary to the nearest hub. Is it to the your nearest office?
No. So first of all, the country's now been opened up for hiring. Given that we can be 100% remote, I can hire anyone in any state. However, if you were someone that, like, for example, if you were associated with the New York office, you used to be in the New York office, and you've decided to move your family to a lower cost location, but you're still going to report into the New York team, but you've decided to go 100% remote, and that is a different state. And that would typically be a lower cost of living state than what New York is. You take a slight reduction for that.
Yep. Okay. Makes sense. So yeah, it can be a tough conversation, right? You're doing the same job. You're just located somewhere else, and your salary is going down. Debbie, Shane, anything?
Actually, on that one, Brian, just to double click on that one for a second, because I think it's really interesting. That's the policy that I've seen every company take, including ZoomInfo. But I think that the really well-funded startups are just saying, we don't care where people live, and we're just going to pay them what we would have to pay them in San Francisco. And so I would imagine what's going to end up happening is that essentially just the economics of the labor market are going to make it such that we have a uniform salaries, because why wouldn't I just poach the best talent from LinkedIn and pay them what I can afford to pay them as opposed to what they deserve to be paid, right?
And Shane, how far away do you think we are from that, from us taking that a step further, where international borders are kind of broken down, right? So you can literally be located anywhere and do your job and potentially be paid the same amount.
You broke up there. If it's a question for me, like I think we're some distance away from from a legal perspective. Even in the US, you would have to have a legal entity set up in every single state to offer that freely in different states. And that becomes even more difficult internationally. But there are companies that are spinning up that effectively they'll employ the person effectively on your behalf. But it's quite expensive. So I think it increases the cost to hire the person by about 50%. That might be worth it if somebody's sitting in, a lower cost market. But there's a lot of there's a lot of kind of legislation that would need to change in order for it to truly open up, and governments don't move fast. So I'd say we're some distance away from that, but I would say that the labor market, the economics of the labor market, leveling things out actually will happen pretty quickly. Like, I'm getting people poached from me right now because they're being offered salaries, and that they're typically in Vancouver, Washington, or in Boston, where typically salaries are lower, and they're just getting offered your San Francisco type salaries because these really well-funded companies are just saying, screw it, we'll pay you what you deserve.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question though, Brian. Like, while working in a different country in the United States doesn't come up so much, it comes up a lot in our Dublin office. And I know it's a really big conversation in Europe because a lot of folks, especially young folks, they went home for COVID and now they all are required to be back in the Dublin office. And that's just a legal thing between different countries in Europe, like they got to be in Dublin. And lockdowns, I think, have been really hard for people, and especially Gen Z that have perhaps like share apartments together and things like that has been difficult. So I hope something pans out between governments, but it's definitely been hard for people, and I think it is a huge part of retention conversations in the European market.
Yeah, it comes back to the point you made about benefits, right? You know, being competitive when you're making offers. This could actually start integrating into that as well. I see HubSpot have a policy where you can work anywhere in the world for 90 days. I guess they've consulted their legal counsels and they can do that. I wonder, have you seen, has that been a discussion at any of your companies? No.
Yeah, it's come up a couple of times in our place. When we've had a few people who've worked, from places like Mexico, and I think to what Shane touched on, once it is not for a duration of time that complicates it, particularly from a tax perspective, our team are actually pretty okay with it. So I think like once they declare it and they let us know how long they're going to be there and that it's within the time frame, we're completely flexible to it.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I'm going to switch gears slightly. I might dive into ask the group quite a tactical question. So from an innovation perspective and a tooling perspective, what changes have you seen here, and are there any exciting tools that your teams have started to use, maybe as a result of remote working and COVID, that you want to share with the group? I know you're a little bit biased on this one, Shane, but I might start it off with you.
Yeah, like ZoomInfo's whole vision is to kind of solve this problem. There's a lot of research out there that says that salespeople spend less than 37% of their time actually selling, and the rest of their time is on like building lists, writing emails, and all of that sort of thing. And I think the critical tools that all sales team needs are things that effectively reduce that time. And we certainly at ZoomInfo, we think about the model, and we're not the only one that offer these products. So I'm not pitching the product necessarily, but the kind of the approach, that there's like 3 layers of tools that you need. One layer is data, like having the best data in the world, like intent data. You've got company and contact data. You've got what technology are they using, and it's living and breathing constantly. And then you've got a layer of what we call orchestration, which is essentially like, are you building triggers so that when things change in your data, automatically certain things happen? So for example, when I left Intercom, we were a ZoomInfo customer. If my job title changes on LinkedIn, there should be a red alert goes off at ZoomInfo saying your decision makers just changed. That's a churn risk, and automatically email my boss and say, hey, we'd love to jump on a call. And then automatically email me in my new job saying, hey, you used to use ZoomInfo. And all of that can now happen automatically with really great orchestration. And then the third layer would be those engagement tools that actually allow you to send the email, put the ads online, make an auto dial for your SDR team. So if you've got those 3 layers all plugged in beautifully together, you can start to build out sales automation teams. And at ZoomInfo, we call our team RevGen. It sits in marketing, and they are sitting there. I would say in any given month, we're running about 100 what we call pipeline plays. There, any play like that I just described, which is like a pipeline play would be key decision maker change jobs, and it's just running. And so I think, if you want to, it's particularly even more important now that so much of selling is done virtually. It's even more possible than I think in the past. And so I think my advice would be, if you're working at any company in that's selling today, your goal should be reduce that number of time, or increase the amount of time that salespeople are actually selling, and build a system that just automates all of the work for them, like the stuff I just described.
Yeah, makes sense. Any other panelists want to add to that? Sorry about the New York siren in the background.
All good. A tool that's been super effective for us is Gong. They did a Super Bowl ad. I don't know if people saw it, but they're awesome. And they've been incredible for new hires, especially, not just new hires, anybody really, but essentially it records your calls, and it also dissects them. I see some nodding heads, like, yeah, some people are using it. It's really, really awesome tool. It's been incredible. Microsoft Teams, quick plug, linkedin.com.
Yeah, Debbie.
Yeah, I would say for us, we actually use Chorus, and I agree with some of the things that Shane called out. The other one that we have started to use, and I think it's an area that we'll see a lot of disruption over the coming years, is actually the deal rooms within Showpad. So we use Showpad from an enablement standpoint, but I think a lot of the buying experience is pretty shitty, and there's a lot of sales interactions that buyers just have to go through. And there are companies now that are trying to create that experience more educational, like less like huge volumes of human interactions, but using clever tooling and content sharing. So we've actually seen higher close rates on deals that are using Showpad deal rooms versus not, off like similar cohorts. So we don't think there's a huge amount of bias, because I think it just allows easy access to content and for people to follow along in the buying process.
Yeah. Going back to something that Shane said. So Shane, you mentioned orchestration, this orchestration data layer that can kind of trigger certain actions. In relation to channels, right? Whether it's email, whether it's a phone call or direct mail, what changes are we seeing there, and what have been brought on by COVID, and maybe where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think, is this driven by COVID or just general digital transformation? I think that there's a big move, and Dara will like this because he works for an ABM platform, but for sales and marketing teams to come together in one platform and to coordinate their outreach. And like even some of the stuff that I just described requires a lot of coordination between sales and marketing. So running your activity through an ABM platform that both sales and marketing are using, so that they're targeting the same customers at the same time, I think is really important, so that you can orchestrate, like build out sequences where first sequence for a week, you go and do the digital ads to create some surround sound and soften the beach. Then there's a call from the SDR, then there's a follow-up email, then there's a direct mail. After the first demo, there's a direct mail that follows up that takes them through more of what the platform can do. And you're just building these really detailed sequences that are using a combination of sales and marketing touch points, so that to the customer it's just like one experience. And Rollworks, obviously, I was there when Rollworks was created, so I have a soft part of my heart for Rollworks, but there are other ones out there. ZoomInfo launched ours on Tuesday last week. That's fun. So yeah, check them out.
Debbie, any thoughts on that one?
Yes.
Not on the launch, on the, on the channels and email calls.
Yeah. We you're right. Shane and Dara, like the really looking at the sequencing has become massively important. What we're also finding is when we launch any, key updates within our platform or new products, we are more, I think, outward in our communication about how our testing has gone with maybe clients and actually, talking about its success. Whereas before, we may not have kind of been so blatant about it. So, you launch something, you put a press release out, it just kind of helps create buzz. So when you do that outreach, in addition to talking about the product, you have some key metrics to share. That started working nicely for us.
Yeah, and across the panelists, how many are using direct mail? Shane, Dara, I guess the ABMers have to be using it. And Sarah Ann, I saw a hand up. Debbie? Yeah, Ish. It's interesting how, over the last kind of decade, direct mail is really making a comeback.
The CEO of Sendoso was actually in Dublin, I think, last week, and they did a partnership with some company. Rob Carney was promoting it. So, check out Sendoso if you're looking for a good direct mail partner.
Okay. So I guess taking kind of more of a macro view, what are you seeing as some of the bigger trends, or taking kind of a 3 to 5 year view? What do you see as the big trends that we might be facing? Sarah Ann, I might direct that one to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think aside from some of the things that we've already talked about, I think talent is forcing the market in a direction where employers have to become much more competitive and much more agile. And what I mean by that is in their overall package, not just competitive from a salary and equity perspective, their benefits, obviously, a lot of the culture and values that a company possess, even if you consider culture and values like the way Google and LinkedIn and stuff are set up with like the free lunch and the, slides in the office and bean bags and like all that, that's all like Gen Z standard. That's expected. That's no longer like, oh, fun to have. Most companies baseline have that sort of thing in the techie digital space anyway, or some format of that, right? I think where companies and where the future will be is companies representing more of a sustainable footprint, more purpose-driven. How are they thinking about diversity and inclusion and belonging at organizations, and taking stances on political issues and things like that. And I think that is going to be more and more important as companies are marketing themselves to attract younger talent in particular.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of people now are they want to know, like, what are the company's values? What is the mission before they engage in an interview process? And, maybe that didn't happen as frequently, 10 years ago or so. Any other panelists want to comment there?
I think maybe one other is, I think there's a big move towards buyer empowerment right now. And, what I mean by that is that buyers want to like control the buying journey themselves. And the world where, sales-led was the only path, I think, is dying. I think you're seeing a lot of like growth in like product-led growth. But even for like ZoomInfo is historically a very sales-led company, and it's been one of its main reasons for success. But even we now will target accounts and target the more junior members of the team to come in and start using in a free trial as a way to pressure the decision maker then to buy the product properly. And so even in a sales-led world where you can only buy through sales, we're doing a lot of product-led growth work. So I think the move of having this balance of product-led growth and sales-led growth and giving more freedom to the buyer to kind of choose how they buy is going to be really important.
Great. Debbie, Dara, any final thoughts on that one?
No, I think my only add would be, and we already covered it, but the career pathing is going to be super important in order to attract, retain, and grow talent. And we're putting an initiative in place where we're taking graduates, college graduates, and starting them in one part of our organization and growing them over the years. And then they could be able to kind of choose their own destiny within the company, because they'll have exposure to lots of different areas. So that's something we're starting very shortly and excited about.
Great. We're gonna take a few questions from the audience now. One for anybody who wants to take it. What are your favorite or necessary work from home accessories? Shane is going to say his guitar. Two of them.
We're just talking about the standing desks. Before we came on, we were just talking about the standing desk. It's pretty, I think it's cool.
Yeah, nothing too exciting for me, just the double screen. Can't go anywhere without the double screen.
I don't have a standing desk, but I've got a riser for my laptop.
Yeah, and a good chair. That's my own need of a good chair with good back support. Okay, how do you rate the importance of live chat feature on websites and the ability for buyers to self-serve on info before the first interaction with account exec? It's almost written for Shane.
I'm wildly biased. I'm not going to answer it. I worked at
background.
Intercom. I worked at Intercom, and now I work for ZoomInfo, who have a chat product as well. So I'm going to go back on mute.
Looks like
we don't have it. I'm interested. I'm interested to learn. You might have to come back off mute, Shane.
Oh, don't talk. So yeah, I think very much obviously I think it's really important. Like Intercom has been extremely successful as a company. ZoomInfo added it to its arsenal because we had a lot of data that showed that it was really important. But I think like most things, it can be often used really badly. Much like if you were running like a retail store and you had a salesperson that was like at the door saying, "Oh, do you want to buy this? Do you want to buy this? Do you want to buy this?" It could be really off-putting. And so it's the most important thing is to, again, use data to tailor the experience depending upon like who the buyer is and where in the website they are, so that you're not like constantly pinging them. So for example, a great place to put them might be on your pricing page when somebody is pretty high intent. One thing that we actually did at Intercom, which was really successful, was we had on our pricing page all of our CTAs were get started. And if you hit get started, if we identified that you were a company of 100 employees or bigger, you would actually not go into the product in a free trial. The chat window would pop up and we'd have immediately a live chat conversation with a sales rep. Whereas if we identified that you were under 100 FTE, we'd drop you straight into a free trial on the product. And so things like that, I think, it's kind of like all tools can be good and all tools can be crap if you misuse them. And so I would say they can have a massive impact on your sales funnel, but you have to make sure that you implement it in the right way.
Anyone else want to add to that? Okay. All right, we're going to start to wrap it up now with just a few quick fire questions. And I'll take maybe one from each of the panelists. So best book you've read or best podcast or blog that you'd recommend the group check out. And maybe Debbie, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So one of my most favorite podcasts is the CMO podcast. I listen to it every time there's a new episode. I'm in the business of, showing brands and agencies how their TV ads perform. So listening to how CMOs think is crucial to my business. The other, another podcast I love is Coaching for Leaders. It is, again, just really interesting for sales leads and beyond. In this ever-changing world, I think there's some great wisdom and insights in kind of snackable good information. So they're my two.
Great. CMO podcast and Coaching for Leaders.
Yep.
Have you come across Shane on the CMO podcast? Not yet.
Tomorrow, right, Shane? Tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. CMO Diaries next week, but not CMO podcast.
Great. Same question for you, Sarah Ann.
Yeah, mine's an old one. Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference.
Classic, love it. Dara?
Actually, on the book side, Sales Acceleration Formula. On the podcast, I usually Google different or search for different sales leaders of interesting companies that I actually want to see if they've done a podcast. I keep an eye on Sales Hacker, but usually I search for specific sales leaders. So I remember listening to your one, Brian. So I still do that once a week as well. The one bit just keeps me sharp.
Good man. Sales Acceleration Formula is another classic, Mark Roberge. And Shane?
Lockhead on Marketing. It's by a guy who sort of like does a lot of category definition. He wrote Play Bigger. It's an amazing book all about how you define categories, and he has a podcast. It's really amazing. Worth listening.
Fantastic. Okay, we're at time. So look, a big thank you again to all our panelists, Debbie, Shane, Dara, Sarah Ann. Thank you for spending some of your Valentine's Day with us. Thanks again to our sponsors, and of course, thanks to everybody who joined. We'll leave it there, folks, and wishing you a very happy Valentine's Day.
Thanks
for having us.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Good job.
Thank you.